Today we will talk about the reality of common responses as well as the necessity of equal employment opportunity laws or EEO laws, as well as the concept of affirmative action in affirmative action programs, whether they're still needed or should we abandon them. We're also going to talk about some common responses in a diverse environment that we tend to hear from our own cultural lens perspective or from other people's cultural lens perspective. One reality is that while equal employment opportunity laws and affirmative action concepts have been very helpful in leveling the playing field in today's workplace, some people are still experiencing discriminatory practices, or at least they're being delayed in terms of promotions in equal pay. When these individuals state their perceptions of receiving blatant or subtle daily indignities to their colleagues or bosses, at times they might hear certain common responses that sort of spin the event in another situation based on our view, based on our background, not necessarily based on what the person is saying. Typically, when people are confronted with information such as what has been shared about discriminatory practices like daily indignities, it does not always match their personal experiences. They tend to question its validity. In other words, we basically tell the person that he or she is incorrect. Using our own reality as an example, a person can take actually a leap of faith and begin to hear the person in terms of their perceived truth or reality, not ours. There's a very strong tendency to think that there can only be one correct reality. Therefore, the other reality must be incorrect. For example, if your reality does not match John's, then John is likely to try to explain away the differences in terms of his own experiences. John will likely say some things like the common responses that are heard in today's society. The common responses which we hear in our societies and some possible responses to them may look something similar to the following statements that I'm going to read to you. 1. Oh, it happens to everybody. Don't worry about it. Possible response might be, what happens to everybody is still not right. 2. Maybe the person is just that way. They're rude. It's their personality. They're not discriminatory. Possible response. Not when all too often I see the same person treating other individuals with respect. Why do they not treat me the same way like everybody else? Maybe you're just being paranoid. If you look for trouble, you'll probably find it. Possible response. It does not happen every time. You can be paranoid, but when it happens often enough to see a pattern, it's hard to ignore. 4. Maybe you should wear some better looking clothes. Possible response. I have, and it still happens to me. Why would one say or make these common responses to someone who is describing his or her experiences, such as how he or she was blatantly discriminated against? Perhaps this is so because the listener's truth is being challenged or does not match the speaker's experiences, and the listener is trying to interpret the speaker's truth in terms of his or her own reality. How do you think someone would feel when one responds to him or her in this way with common responses? It happens to everybody. They don't mean any harm by it. They didn't discriminate against you. You're being paranoid. Wear different clothes. Maybe they'll respond differently. What a particular feeling may this invoke to the speaker if they hear these common responses? It is probably that making the speaker feel pretty badly or negatively. Some feelings experienced by the speaker may be mad, angry, disappointed, or even frustrated as he or she is not being believed, despite the fact that the person might be sharing a factual personal experience in his or her actual feelings with you. What impact will these types of common responses have on the relationship between you and the other individual who is telling you his or her experiences? You might say, what relationship, obviously, because the person is going to stop sharing his or her experience with you. There probably will not be a relationship if this process of questioning and using common responses continue. If the speaker and listener are coworkers, how might this affect their working relationships? Will they continue to talk to each other? Perhaps not, at least not about their personal experiences. Their relationship would be strained at least, and consequently productivity would suffer between them, or teamwork would suffer between them. The reality is that we all have bias and perceptual filters, and we need to make sure it doesn't impact us negatively in terms of our relationships. Cultural lens or learned stereotypes that filter certain information in and other information out of a person's awareness. For example, if I believe based on previously learned stereotypes that you and I are, or we should be different, then the information about you that makes it through my filter is about the ways in which we are different. The ways in which you and I are similar tend to not make it through my perceptual filters. So we need to be very careful and always listen about everything the other person is saying. On the other hand, if I believe that you and I are similar, then the information that makes it through my perceptual filters or cultural lens is all about our similarities and not necessarily the differences. Overall, one's truth is often the result of his or her experiences and the way he or she perceives things to be, or his or her perceived reality or truth. We're brought up in a society whose members do not always treat each other very well, and those inappropriate behaviors sometimes carry over into the workplace, including your department and your organization. You may ask, what can professionals and managers gain from becoming aware of these real indignities that occur in today's society? Well, by becoming aware of these daily indignities and the different ways in which society may discriminate, professionals can help themselves to form habits that will not be discriminatory, and habits that will help develop an inclusive work environment in their companies and in their departments, so you can create a better department, a better organization. Overall, with regards to the perceptions and realities, we can conclude the following. We tend to see the truth based only on our perceived reality. Therefore, we tend to think that if our reality is right, then somebody else's reality must be wrong. Second, there may be truth in two different perceptions or realities of two different individuals. 3, refusing to believe there may be truth in someone else's reality is a double indignity. 4, over time, discriminatory practices such as daily indignities and unearned privileges can affect self-confidence and self-esteem, which affects a person's morale and level of productivity in the workplace. So be very careful with those realities and conclusions. Now let's talk about affirmative action, its purpose and its history for a short period of time. Since a larger percentage of minorities and women still tend to stagnate, plateau, or quit when they fail to move up the ladder, affirmative action programs tend to set the stage for a gender-blind, color-blind, and culture-blind workplace, which is what we need. According to Dr. Roosevelt Thomas, affirmative action was originally stated with several premises in the 1960s, which include the following facts that I'll present to you. Number 1, adult white males made up majority of the American workplace at that time during the 60s and 70s. Number 2, widespread racial, ethnic, and sexual prejudices kept minorities out of the workplace, at least out of the promotions and equal pay. 3, all leaders and politicians agreed that women, blacks, immigrants, and other minorities should be allowed into the workplace as a matter of public policy and common decency. 4, they also agreed that sometimes legal and social coercion are necessary to bring about needed changes in the workplace. Minorities and women are no longer needing a boarding pass, since the major problem is no longer having an entry opportunity into the workplace. Rather, the major challenge nowadays is to make better use of their potential at every level, especially in the middle management and leadership positions. in any organization, public sector or private sector. Affirmative action, which focused on short-term solutions to a major problem, alone cannot cope with the challenge of creating an inclusive work setting that is geared toward upward mobility of all individuals, including white men, because we do not want reverse discrimination either. Dr. Roosevelt mentioned that we need to continue affirmative action. So we still need a diverse workplace to deal with diverse challenges. Therefore, affirmative action programs should be continued by organizations. The purpose and goal of managing diversity has always been and should be to develop everyone's capacity to accept, to incorporate, and to empower the diverse human talents in the organization, in the nation, and actually in the world, so everybody can be a productive human being. Affirmative action does not support or require the promotion of any unqualified individual in any workplace. It's never expected that. Sociologists and other experts have estimated that it would take about 7 generations for the representation of some groups to normalize without the proactive implementation of affirmative action concept. So the intervention was necessary to bring about equality in today's workplace or more quickly. Affirmative action was designed to help break what was and still is known as the cycle of oppression. The need for acceptable education, housing, and employment for all sectors of the population represents 3 fairly basic human needs in today's society. These needs are interdependent. In some cases, oppression comprises a vicious cycle that prevents some minorities from fairly accessing such opportunities in terms of housing and education and so on. For example, one needs a quality education to obtain a good job that will enable the purchase of a good house located in an area with access to good schools that will provide a quality education for his or her kids. Many people are able to break out of the cycle, but some give up trying because they're overwhelmed or don't know how to proceed since they face many consistent biases and stereotypes on a day-to-day basis, which we call daily indignities. No matter where a society attempts to break the cycle, it is likely to cause some pain to some individuals. So where do we break it? The reality is that leaders must start somewhere to break the cycle of oppression in order to create an inclusive and healthy environment for all of their employees and everyone in society. It is the responsibility of all officials and leaders to exercise patience, discipline, and good judgment to end the cycle of oppression which are impacting people's heads, their hearts, and their habits on a day-to-day basis. Perhaps affirmative action strategies that have been implemented in the United States can be a good means for peacefully creating a fair and just society for everyone throughout the world through good education, effective communication, and honest negotiations across our countries and across borders. As always, aim to be an inclusive professional who leads by listening effectively, by learning continuously, and by thinking win-win for all individuals and all stakeholders. Good luck to you in being an inclusive professional manager in any workplace.